Hello, and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. The Minnesota Timberwolves fell to the Golden State Warriors on Sunday by 23, and this was just a tale of more transition defense issues. I want to break that all down and talk about what actually did go well. There were some things, as weird as it sounds, there were some things the Wolves did well Sunday. So we'll take a level-headed approach to that. We'll break it all down here on the post-game pod. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Happy Monday, everybody, and hopefully you had a fantastic weekend, a great Thanksgiving weekend, hopefully a long weekend. This is the post-game podcast. The Timberwolves lost the Warriors by 23 on Sunday afternoon. I want to break down the pros and cons from this game. Obviously, the result is far from what we wanted. There were some things, though, that we can, try and move forward positively with, right? There were some positives, but I also want to be really honest about what the issues are. And it's unfortunately not anything all too different from what we've seen in some of the Wolves losses really to this point throughout the season, through the first 20 games. So we're going to break down the good and the bad from Sunday here in just a minute. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, you can listen to this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. That includes Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey. You can also watch on YouTube. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, and that's with two B's, two E's, CKEN. A reminder that you can also find this podcast on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, and you can find that on Roku or Amazon Fire TV, as well as all the other fantastic Locked On Sports Minnesota shows. Again, Roku or Amazon Fire TV, the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. All right. Let's start here. The biggest takeaway from this one. The biggest problem in this game was transition defense. And that's probably been, if we want to take the season first 20 games, and maybe we'll do this later this week. I mean, who knows? We'll see how the Wizards game on Monday turns out. But we could do this. I might do this for Wednesday's show. Like, you take the first, not quite third of the season, but pretty close to that. And we say, okay, what has the number one issue been? We could talk about defensive rebounding. Like, if you'd asked me, I mean, you could seriously make that argument. You could talk about three-point shooting. The Wolves shot the ball a little better against the Warriors on Sunday. Some of that was too little, too late. That would probably be on the list. Those are certainly two of maybe the three or four things. But the number one thing for me is transition defense. And on the one hand, like, coming into Sunday's game against the Warriors, the Wolves are ninth in defensive rating, ninth in defensive efficiency overall, according to Basketball Reference. Every site's got a little bit of a different measure of that. But on Basketball Reference, the Wolves were ninth in defensive rating. So you could say, well, overall, all things considered, that's baked in, right? The Wolves must be doing enough in transition. But the frustrating thing is, as bad as the offense has been at times, and it has been clunky, if the Wolves had just played adequate transition defense to this point, then they've got a top 5 defense, because their half-court defense is actually really good. And I'm going to pull some numbers to play this out a bit further on Wednesday and talk about, like, transition opportunities. We did this a couple weeks ago, actually, in terms of points per possession and transition, and why that's such a big issue for this team, and just how much better they could be. They could be, instead of the 9th best defense, which that's going to go down, of course, after giving up what they gave up, 137 to the Warriors on Sunday. But what's a number 9 defense coming into the Golden State game? They're probably a top 5, if not top 3 or 4 defense in the league, if they can just play adequate transition defense. It's a number of things that play into this. But if you just watch the first 8 or 9 minutes of this game, you will see what I'm talking about. That was the biggest issue, right? From the 3.5 minute mark on, or we'll just call it from the second quarter on. So second, third, fourth quarter, the last 75% of this game, the Timberwolves played the Warriors even. They were a -3, and that was garbage time. The Warriors hit a couple of shots in garbage time. They effectively played Golden State even for the second, third, and fourth quarters. It was the first quarter that was the issue. They were down 47-27 at the end of the first quarter. Golden State got to 40 points with 3:24 left in the first quarter. If you give up a 40-point quarter, that's really bad. If you give up a 40.8 minutes, or I guess 8.5 minutes, that's really, really, really bad. And it was mostly transition defense. Now, yes, Golden State makes some crazy shots. Steph hit one that was actually a lightly contested, like 33-footer, we'll call it. Jordan Poole pulled from who knows how far away in transition, completely unexpected, and knocked it down as part of that. Like, there were some nuts shots. There were. But so much of this was transition. There was one example where Towns was in the left slot, just above the break, and missed a three, watched it for a split second, and then hustled down the court, but he was too late to catch up. And it wasn't on him. Because, like, here's the other thing. The Wolves have been shooting and trying to get back immediately, and they've missed offensive rebound opportunities because they're not actually getting back either, right? They're kind of like it's the thing Andrew Wiggins used to do all the time, where you're not crashing the offensive glass and you're not getting back in transition, you're lingering. And they've done a little bit too much of that. Towns did that here. The bigger issue was that on the weak side, I think it was Anthony Edwards, and there was another player over there too. I think it was actually Kyle Anderson, weirdly enough, that did not run back. They saw, and now I'm forgetting the Golden State player, whoever it was, I think it might have been Draymond, contest and release down the floor, and they had to have seen him and just didn't go back with him. And by the time, I think it was Steph got the rebound for Golden State, and he flung a nice bounce pass, and it was an easy bucket on the other end because the Wolves are not communicating. They're not communicating. They're not playing as a team when it comes to transition defense and transition offense too. We talk about this all season. Both fast break, open floor, both ends of the floor has been sloppy. It's like they've never played together, right? And there's an element to that. Certainly, I'm not making an excuse. That certainly is a thing, right? But transition defense, you do that at pickup basketball at the YMCA or at the park, right? Like, you talk in transition, you say, get back, or, I got yours, or whatever, you got mine, or take ball, or whatever it is. Like, you're communicating in transition. Like, somebody is taking this guy streaking down the floor by himself, but nobody did. The Wolves, of course, didn't get the offensive rebound, even though they had 5 guys on that half of the timeline to the Warriors 4, because one guy's already under the basket, and Golden State gets an easy bucket. So that's partially on Towns. It's partially on the communication between Towns and Anderson and Edwards, whoever was on the perimeter, and then those guys to actually make the effort to get back. And so much of transition defense is effort, right? The rest of it is basically communication. Like, yeah, obviously skill plays into it, but the Wolves have the skill to do that. Now, Jaden McDaniels didn't play. That obviously hurts, but Anthony Edwards, he could chase guys down and get chase down blocks in transition all day long. Towns is pretty good at getting back when he actually tries, right? Like, he's got long strides. He can block shots. Like, kind of the same thing with Rudy. He's a bit more lumbering, but like, they've got guys that can get back. Ant has no excuse. When Jaden McDaniels is on the floor, which he has been for much of the season, basically all the games to this point, except for foul trouble, they've got the athletes, they've got the length, they've got the athleticism and the youth to be able to get back in transition and make opponents actually work for fast break points. That did not happen in this game. And that was, Golden State runs. The Wolves run, right? They're top 5 in pace coming into this game. What were they? The Wolves were 3rd in pace coming into this game. Golden State runs. Like, if you don't get back in transition, they're going to get an easy 3. They're going to get a dunk. They're 2nd in pace. So they play even a little bit faster than Minnesota. And the book on the Wolves to this point in the season is you can run on this team. They don't want it. They want to run offensively. And I use that term loosely because until recently, like, D'Lo wasn't pushing the pace. Ant was not always pushing the pace. The Wolves were fast in pace because they were getting shots up quickly, but they weren't always quality layups or dunks or fouls in transition. They were semi-decent, semi-open pull-up threes, in transition. And the transition offense, again, has improved. But the Wolves don't get back defensively. Like, they want to run on offense. They don't want to run on defense. And that's the book on the Wolves. A veteran team, a well-coached team like Golden State, a team with guys like Steph and Draymond, Klay Thompson, Jordan Poole. These guys all know what they're doing. And they're more than happy to push the pace against a team like the Wolves. And Minnesota showed no interest in putting up real resistance in transition. And that was the biggest problem in this game. There were other issues, and there were some positives as well. So I want to get to all that here in just a moment. And that's where we'll go next on the show here today. And we'll close with individual studs and duds and a really quick look at Wolves Wizards on Monday night, because that is, tomorrow's show is also a post-game pod. The Wolves have this tough home road back-to-back going to the East Coast. So we'll do that here next. First, though, today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to you by our friends at Turo. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, You can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from A to B. You can test drive that new vehicle that you've had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life as well. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen today. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, so the biggest issue was transition, right? A second issue, which isn't going to show up as much in the box score because well, I'll get to that in a second. It's offensive rebounding, right? The Wolves were only out rebounded in terms of offensive rebounds, 8-6 in this game. They allowed 8 offensive rebounds, which is still a few too many, but it was even for much of the game. The problem is that so much of this damage was done very early in the game as the Warriors built their lead. They had a couple of these no man's land rebounds right around the lane that the Wolves just couldn't come up with. And there was one really key one late in the game when the Wolves were making a push. It's not necessarily sheer number in this case, where it was when it came to fast break points for the Warriors. That was just a mountain to climb. This was the moments in which the Warriors got these opportunistic offensive rebounds. That was what was most damaging. There were several in the first quarter as the Warriors were building their lead. And then there was one key one in the fourth quarter. I believe it was either Steph or Klay Thompson that pulled a rebound down with 3-4 Wolves around him and kicked the ball out. The Warriors ended up getting a bucket on the offensive end of the floor to extend the lead that had gotten all the way down to 10. This wasn't offensive rebounding, but this is a loose ball, which goes in a similar category, right? Hustle plays, 50-50 balls, etc. After the Wolves cut it to 10 points after an Anthony Edwards three-pointer, the target center was alive. 5.5 minutes to play in the game, I believe. And Golden State calls a timeout. They run a sloppy set, and the ball's just bouncing like at the free throw line. And whoever it was defensively, I think it was Austin Rivers, had his back to the ball. Nobody from the Wolves could get there in time. The Warriors scoop it back up, and then later in the possession, Steph hits a three, and it's a 13-point lead. And then after a missed layup from Rudy, then it's a Klay three, and then it's a ball goes through the hands of Rudy, and it's a Klay three, and it's a 19-point game again. And the Wolves didn't realistically, I think there was one more timeout in there, and they got it. They scored a bucket at some point, but it was basically over. And then last 3.5 minutes were garbage time. 50-50 balls, offensive rebounding. Again, the box score does not tell the whole story when it comes to the offensive rebounding, or I should say for the Wolves, defensive rebounding issues. The Wolves just didn't do enough. They ultimately, for the game, they were only offensively out rebounded 8-6, but for the game, they were a -16. I talked off the top about if we're going to list the biggest 3 issues for the Wolves. And if you listen to the show, I sound like a broken record, but if you've watched the Wolves all season and haven't listened to the show, these are the things that you should keep noticing, right? The transition defense, the defensive rebounding, and the making open shots. We'll get to the shooting here in a minute, but rebounding as a whole, and the Wolves on the offensive glass, again, have been decent so far this season, not quite where they were last year. But they're they're down to 19th in offensive rebound rate. They're 24th in defensive rebound rate. That number is going to decrease after this game. The Wolves only had 25 defensive rebounds in this game. Now, part of it's because Golden State shot a crazy almost 58% from the field, so that'll do it. But they were still a -16 on the glass. That cannot happen against a team that plays as fast as Golden State and is as good as Golden State. And this is a healthy Golden State team. That's the other thing, by the way. The Wolves have had this stretch of good fortune in playing teams, good and bad teams, without their best players. This was I know that the Warriors coming into this game had only won once on the road all season, but they've won, I think 7 of their last 9 or something games. And they're, yes, only 500, but they're the defending champs. They're healthy. They're rounding into shape very quickly. I think now they've won 8 out of 11 total after starting 3-7. This is not a bad team, and they are healthy. So that certainly hurt the Wolves. In terms of shooting, the Wolves actually kind of shot the ball okay in this game. They missed some bunnies at the rim, which was an issue. And actually Towns was the opposite. Towns shot 7 of 9 on 2-point shots and just 1 of 5 outside the arc. He missed his first 4 3-pointers in this game after missing like his last 10 in the game on Friday. So Towns was the flip, the reverse of this, the inverse. But the rest of the team struggled at the rim. Rudy had some misses at the rim that were pretty disappointing. Anthony Edwards had some misses at the rim that were pretty disappointing. D'Lo had some rough possessions as well. This was just a missed shots at the rim, but overall good 3-point shooting. Jalen Noel started out extremely hot in this game. He hit 3 3-pointers in the first half alone and was really good in his first stint as the Wolves were kind of trying to push back in. That was end of the first part of the second quarter when the Wolves were trying to regain their footing. Jalen Noel was great during that stint. And overall for the game, the Wolves shot 14 of 35 from 3-point range, 40%, which will obviously help their season total to this point. Coming into this game, the Wolves were shooting under 33% from 3 as a team, 32.6% to be exact. They were 27th in the league in 3-point percentage as a team, shot 40% in this game. That's something that actually went right. The Wolves finally started to make open shots. And if Towns was shooting like he normally was, we're talking about probably a 45% from the field game. Nas was 2 of 3. Jalen was 4 of 7. D'Angelo Russell was 3 of 6. Ant was 2 of 6. Like, you had guys shooting the ball fairly well from the three-point range in this game. And something that was such a big issue just 2 nights ago against Charlotte in a game that the Wolves should have won. They lost by a bucket against a bad team. They actually shot the ball decently from the perimeter. It's those missed opportunities in the paint. It's the silly turnovers, which weren't quite as bad in this game, but there still were some. The defensive rebounding, the transition defense, those things that all really add up. They added up in this game. And it was really, really disappointing because, again, after the first quarter, the Wolves were only a -3. They were right in this game. They competed. They played hard on both ends of the floor. It was the setup. It was the first part of the first quarter, which, by the way, is completely opposite, maybe not opposite, different from what we're used to, right? The Wolves have typically struggled in the third quarter to this point this season, just like against Charlotte on Friday when they were up 10 at halftime and had a miserable third quarter, gave up 37 points in the third to the worst offense in the league on Friday. In this game, they give up 47 points in the first to one of the league's best offenses when they're all, when they're all on the floor and playing well together. Golden State will always have one of the league's best offenses. But it was just a bad start at home matinee. I talked about this with Marnie on the postcast on Friday. Matinees are weird, right? The first quarter could go one of two ways. It's either the home team is ready, they got up in their own beds, whatever, or it's the home team's been home for the last couple of days. They had to wake up early. Their routine was off. The road team's just ready to go because they're already on the road. And, in this case, it was the more veteran team. It was the defending champs. It was the road team that came out ready to play much more so than the Timberwolves. Okay, studs and duds. Let's go ahead and roll right into that because I do want to talk Wolves Wizards here at the end of the game. So let's start with duds today, and I'll do that first, and then we'll do studs. So do this in a little bit of a different order, and then we'll do Wolves Wizards. In terms of duds for this game, Rudy Gobert for me was a dud. He did not play a good game. I recognize he had the best plus minus of any of the Wolves starters. That's true. For whatever that's worth, again, I think individual plus minus in a box score after a game is very noisy. I talk about that a lot on the show. He did not play well. 9 and 10, 4 of 9 shooting. He only had 2 turnovers in the box score, but he had at least 4 passes that slipped through his hands. And he shot 4 of 9. That's not a bad number for Jordan McLaughlin off the bench or Bryn Forbes or Jalen Noel. That's not a good number for a guy who doesn't shoot the ball beyond 3 feet and is a career, 60-ish% shooter, or whatever he is from the floor. 4 of 9 is not great. 1 of 2 at the line. He only got the 2 free throw attempts. He missed, several lobs or several passes, and not even lobs that he should have corralled, only had the 1 block. Just not a very good Rudy Gobert game. And you could tell the crowd was getting anxious. There was a lot of tension in the fourth quarter when Rudy touched and fumbled away the basketball. He had a couple just really ugly possessions. Not a solid Rudy Gobert game. I'm going to leave it at that. There's nothing else. It just wasn't a good game for Rudy. Other duds, I don't know that I really have anybody else. I don't know that individually, Austin Rivers didn't do a whole lot offensively, but he started in place of Jaden McDaniels. I thought he was pretty good defensively on Steph Curry, made him work, frustrated him a little bit in the first half. Steph was just very good, although Steph did out rebound him 11-2. So Rivers was so worried about, keeping up with Steph, rightfully so, on offense, that Curry had such a good game on the glass and Rivers didn't help there. But I don't think he was a dud in this game. The Wolves just a lot of guys were just kind of there. And the only real dud for me is Rudy Gobert. Okay. Let's close the show here by doing studs. And then we'll also talk Wolves Wizards here to close the show. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at Prize Picks. If you took Karl-Anthony Towns on Sunday, points over, I think you'd be in pretty good shape. He ended up dropping 21. I think usually the points over under is right around 20 points. If you took the Ant points over, you would have been great, 26 points. Or maybe the free throws made over, because they don't just have the simple categories. They have some a little bit more obscure off the wall ones, like free throws made, for instance, over at Prize Picks. And Ant made 10 free throws in Sunday's game. If you're wondering how Prize Picks works, it's awesome. It's really easy. You pick 2 to 6 players if they'll score more or less than their Prize Picks projection. Again, including some interesting categories. You can win up to 25 times your money on any entry, and you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. You're not competing against pros or anything like that. Any sport you watch, including NBA, NFL, MLB, etc., you can cross sports. You can make your entries in less than 60 seconds. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, they'll give you $100. If you deposit $50, they'll give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, let's talk studs. We already did the singular dud from Wolves Warriors. Let's talk studs. The Timberwolves on Sunday. Again, a lot, like I said a minute ago, a lot of these guys were just kind of there. Nobody played a great game. I'm going to give one to Anthony Edwards because this was actually not like some of these Wolves losses. He's had some actively bad games where he's just kind of hurt the Wolves with defense, or he's hurt the Wolves with, complaining about fouls, not getting back. I don't think that was an issue in this game. And he scored 26 on 17 shots. We have to give Ant some credit. He had a couple tough threes, 10 of 11 at the line. He got to the line a lot. He stayed aggressive getting to the basket. He had 4 assists and only 1 turnover. You'd like to see him have more than 4 rebounds, but I thought Ant played pretty well. And he wasn't the reason that the Timberwolves gave up 47 in the first quarter. Even if he played better as the game went on, I don't think there's much blame to be handed to Ant in this game. Another stud for me, Jalen Noel, 16 points on 5 of 11 shooting. He was 4 of 7 on threes. I think he made 3 of his first 4 from outside the arc in the first half. 2 of 3 at the line. He added 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and a steal. No turnovers. Was a +6 in 24 minutes. He was one of only 2 Timberwolves players to have a positive plus-minus. One of 3. Kyle Anderson and Bryn Forbes being the other 2. But he played really well. The Wolves bench actually more than held their own against the Warriors bench for much of the game. So that's, if we're going to take another small silver lining, small positive from this game, I think that would be one. So Ant and Jalen Noel are 2 of my studs. I have a tough time coming up with a third. I mean, Karl-Anthony Towns scored the ball fine. He was good in the paint. He was very good in the post in this game. He got a lot of post touches because the Warriors were not doubling. He scored pretty easily on Kuminga. He scored pretty easily on whoever else ended up guarding him, except for Draymond. That's the only guy he had troubles with one-on-one. He did have 6 turnovers, only 4 assists, only 4 rebounds for Cat. So not a stud, not a dud. Just kind of a game for Cat. D'Angelo Russell, kind of the same thing, just kind of there, not super efficient. Was active defensively. I thought D'Lo continued his recent stretch of being more active and trying harder on defense, which matters a lot. But for me, just the 2 studs, just Anthony Edwards and Jalen Noel, just the 1 dud, Rudy Gobert in this game. Okay, let's talk Wolves Wizards. The Timberwolves have this tough back-to-back. At least it's a matinee on Sunday, but you lose an hour going east. You take on the Washington Wizards at 7 Eastern, 6 Central on Monday night in Washington. The Wizards are maybe a little bit better than a lot of people expected them to be. They have lost a couple in a row, but they had 2 consecutive games at Miami. I'm recording this while they're playing the Boston Celtics. So as of this recording, this is mid-game. They're losing to the Boston Celtics in Boston. So it's pretty likely they come into this game on a three-game losing streak. But just prior to that, the Washington Wizards had won 6 out of 7, with their only loss being a 1-point loss to Oklahoma City mixed in. They beat Memphis, they beat Utah, they beat Dallas, all mixed in there. So Washington's playing a lot better than people have really expected them to. This is not going to be an easy game on the second night of a back-to-back for Minnesota. And again, they're going to fall to the top 10 in defensive rating. The 3-point shooting is still going to be bottom 5 in the league. Those are major issues for the Timberwolves. In terms of what they have to face with Washington doesn't play very fast, so the Wolves would be well served to run on them. They are a good defensive team, and they've struggled offensively. They're coming into play on Sunday. They're 26th in offensive rating. And the Wizards as a team, They don't shoot a ton of threes. They're kind of middle of the pack, in the middle of the pack in terms of makes as well. They also don't draw a ton of fouls on the offensive end of the floor. It's really more just about they just try to make twos. They're middle of the pack in terms of 2-point attempts per game, 2-point percentage. They're not a super high efficiency offense. And that obviously works in the Wolves' favor. Defensively, Golden State's a really good rebounding team, defensive rebounding. They don't foul a lot. They don't give up a ton of free throw attempts. So that hurts the Wolves because the Wolves don't do a ton of damage on the offensive glass outside of Rudy and trying to get tip-ins. And the Wolves rely on drawing fouls quite a bit. So this is actually a pretty difficult matchup for Minnesota. Obviously, Bradley Beal is the guy you want to keep an eye on Washington's side. But they've got some other guys playing well. I mean, Kristaps Porzingis has played well to this point in the season. Old friend Taj Gibson's on the roster, by the way. Monty Morris, former Denver Nugget, has played well for them. They've got just a really interesting roster. Kyle Kuzma not shooting the ball well, but is scoring 20 points per game. They're a pretty intriguing team. Oh, I should also mention Will Barton. I love Will Barton. Also came over from the Denver Nuggets. So I don't think it's a great matchup for Minnesota. I think Porzingis could give them trouble. I think that the Wolves could struggle to chase Bradley Beal. Hopefully Jaden McDaniels is able to play. It sounds like he was reportedly a game time decision on Sunday and just wasn't. It was an illness. So, fingers crossed he's able to go Monday, because that would be big to have him to try and check Beal and to a lesser extent Kuzma. But this will be an interesting matchup. I should say that Monty Morris will be questionable on Monday as well. He's probably the main rotation guy who is going to be questionable, that has been playing of late. Delon Wright's been out for about a week and will also remain out with a hamstring injury. So a difficult matchup for Minnesota. I mean, like, second half of back-to-back, traveling, a team that's hovering around 500, probably having lost 3 straight coming into the game on Monday, and is also going to be hungry. Also playing a back-to-back, but a shorter travel day than Minnesota. So hopefully the Wolves are able to pull this one out and avoid a 3-game losing streak on the heels of what was a 5-game winning streak. But it could be a difficult matchup on Monday for the Wolves. We'll, of course, go live following the game, as we always do. The episode before this, on whatever audio feed you're listening to, is the live postcast that I did with Marnie Gellner following Wolves Warriors on Sunday. We'll go live on Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube, 45 minutes following the game Monday as well. So be sure to check that out. And we'll also do the post-game pod that'll post early Tuesday as well. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to this show wherever you listen to podcasts. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. A reminder, you can listen wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota Roku or Amazon Fire TV app. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves or at Beecken, with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On Sports Today show. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.